Well, hey, staffing folks, Dr. Grimes here. I wanted to check in with you and make sure things are going well, to give you a little bit of encouragement and give you a little bit of a heads up here on the questions that are coming up, and give you some ideas that you might consider as you're starting to develop those things. First of all, it's great to have you in class this semester. I apologize to you for the timing of when you took it. I think this is an absolutely amazing class that you'll learn a lot of great useful things from. And normally I'm very interactive with this particular class because there's so much going on, there's so many moving parts. The ability for us to talk face-to-face is very, very helpful. Unfortunately, this semester is just a wacko killer for me. Because I've got a very, very heavy load from a teaching standpoint, plus a lot of responsibilities on campus that are distracting me, and a lot of things going on in my personal life with commitments to church and family and 100 different directions all at the same time. Normally, folks don't typically understand this very well, but a full load for a teacher is considered to be 4 classes. The equivalent of a class is about 10 hours a week, so 4 hours of or 4 classes, 12 hours of credits, typically consumes about 40 hours of your time. And when you have a master's level class, they say that you ought to spend twice as much time on that. So typically you have 4 undergraduate, or you have 2 undergraduate and a graduate. And that accumulates your 40 hours of time. This semester I have got, I think, 5 undergraduate classes and a master's class. So by that mathematics, I've got about a 70-hour-a-week job right now. Some of you can relate to that. You can put me to shame with the hours that you put in. I'm also chair of a major committee here on campus, which takes little spurts, lots and lots of time, and I haven't hit one of those first spurts yet. Typically in the week or 2 before a meeting of this particular committee, there's a lot of work on my part as the chairman, and we haven't gotten there yet, but that'll slow me down. And then all the other little miscellaneous things that you all have to deal with, just like me, make it a very tiring semester. If it were a normal semester where I only had a few classes, then we would be trying to do some video conference calls where we could interact with each other. Unfortunately, because of my limitations, I'm not doing that this semester. But you do have some of the videos. You kind of know me a little bit in my personality. I just haven't gotten to know you yet. And that's why I do some of these videos, because you don't have an opportunity on those video conference calls to ask me questions about stuff like this. And all that said, here's my lengthy introduction before I get into the meat of the issue. I wanted to talk to you in this video specifically about the questions assignment. By now, if you're looking at this thing, you are in the middle of the 3 lessons that I call INT 1, INT 2, and INT 3, where we talk about the kinds of questions that you might ask and the reasoning for those questions. And you're getting ready, if you haven't already started, to begin working on the questions that you're going to ask in your interview. And I wanted to, again, to talk about those questions and point you down a particular path and tell you what I'm looking for, what I think will help you as you get ready to do your interviews. Keep in mind that I want these interviews to go 30 minutes, maybe 40. 40 is probably ideal. And a lot of times what folks say to me when they first see that is, how in the heck do you make an interview last 30 to 45 minutes? But only on rare exception does an interview that goes 10 or 12 or 15 minutes end up being in your best interests as a candidate. I had an underclassman student on campus the other day tell me that she had an interview with an organization that lasted about 12 minutes. And she walked out of it thinking, there's no way that they really know whether I can do this job or not. But she actually got the job, and that's the rare exception. They already know her. She already works for them, and she was applying for a step up in their job, and they didn't need more than about 10 or 12 minutes to see if she could do it. But for a first-time interaction with a candidate that you've never met before, it's going to take 30 to 45 minutes to really get a feel for who they are, their personality, their skills, whether they can do this job or not. So the questions that you ask are critical. You've got to have enough questions. You've got to have the right questions. And one of the things that you have to worry about when you're asking questions is these questions have to be so specific and tied to the job that there's no room for confusion, there's no room for misinterpretation. One of the biggest problems we can have in human resources, especially when it comes to recruiting and interviewing and selection, is that we open ourselves up to discrimination charges, whether we mean to or not, because somebody misinterprets or chooses to read it wrong. and then challenges us on it. So the better we do at creating questions that have no room for misinterpretation, the more likely we're going to get through this thing cleanly without any problems coming up. So let's talk about these questions. I would say that if you want to fill 40 to 45 minutes, and in a different video, I'm going to talk about how you use that time wisely. It doesn't have to all be question and answer. You can have some degree of talking where you describe the company, the position, and whatnot. There's a time for them to ask you questions, and that could reasonably be 5 to 10 minutes of your interview. But you still need to figure out how to have enough questions for 30 good minutes of time. And the good rule of thumb is, depending on the question, you might have to have 3 questions per minute, which means 30 minutes, 90 questions if they're short answer questions. Or you might could have 3 minutes per question if you have a question that causes them to talk for 3 minutes. So obviously, the more questions you have that causes them to think and talk and tell stories, the quicker you use up your time, which is in your best interests. Let's start from the back and work forward. How are you going to get the grade that you want? It's a 100-point assignment for the questions. If you look at the rubric that is attached to the Dropbox, you'll see 4 major categories: quality, completeness, applicability, and cleanliness. In terms of quality, you get either 50 for perfect, or you get A, B, or C. Same thing for completeness, applicability, and cleanliness. It's either perfect or it's an A, B, or C. There are going to be a lot of A's, there are going to be a lot of B's. Perfect is a hard standard to attain, and I reserve it for those that there's no way that I can give you any feedback other than there's no feedback that I can give you. You did so well. You shouldn't expect coming into this to get 100 on this assignment. An A is not that hard. B's are pretty common, but that's not the end of the world. Hopefully there are no C's, because you just didn't do what I asked you to do if you end up with a C on this thing. In terms of quality, notice in the left-hand column on the rubric that I attached, the Excel sheet, a perfect score means that you've done an outstanding job in terms of the quality. What you're trying to measure through this interview, I think these questions are going to measure, and you've done it. The wording is good. Spelling and grammar don't make a whole lot of difference when you're doing a verbal interview, because they can't tell that you've misspelled a word when you say it. But on paper, it needs to be clean. You don't want to have misspelled words or bad grammar or bad sentence structure or misplaced modifiers or all those kinds of grammatical kinds of things, because chances are pretty good that you're not going to know the question before you ask it. You're going to have to read it off of a piece of paper. And if it's not phrased well on the paper, you're going to stumble through it in the live interview. So having it nice and clean on paper is really, really important. Quality to me means that it ties in really well to the job. It ties in real well to the job description. It measures what you're trying to measure, and that's very subjective on my part. But I know it when I see it. It's not always easy to describe. But there are a lot of times in this class, on this assignment, where folks ask questions and they're fluff, or they're taking us into a different direction than we really need to go. Why are you doing the interview? It is so that you know if this candidate is going to be able to do this job. And if you have multiple candidates who can do this job, which one is a little better than the others? And that's what your questions need to get at. Can you do this job, and will you be better at it than somebody else who's also applying? In terms of the completeness, there shouldn't be any gaps. And what I would challenge you to do is, you're creating your questions, try to avoid the things that everybody asks in an interview. Tell me about yourself. That's very open-ended, and that can get you into a lot of trouble. What is your greatest strength? What is your greatest weakness? What would your last boss say about you? None of that really necessarily relates to this job. Whether your boss says great things about you or not doesn't tell me if you can do this job. Your greatest strength may have nothing to do whatsoever with this job. So focus on this job. As you're developing your questions, have that job description in front of you. And every question, with a few exceptions, just about every question ought to be either directly tied to one of the essential functions, or it ought to be directly tied to one of the knowledge, skills, abilities, and other characteristics. And if you focus on those 2 sections of your job description, you're probably going to have a good interview. And I'd say do it like this. Read your essential functions. Pick out one of those essential functions and look at the wording that you used on the job description. What is it that this person does in this job? See if you can come up with a question that gets to whether they can do that thing or not. that demonstrates their ability to do that thing. If you've been watching any of the job interview episodes, you'll be able to pick out some times where in some cases they ask them to perform a task, a visual kind of thing, but in some cases they ask them a question. What does this acronym mean? Or tell me about how you would approach this. That's an essential function of the job. Knowing that term, knowing how to apply it, knowing the context of it, knowing how to do this skill. Some of those questions very, very directly, even without looking at the job description, that's one of the essential functions. If I don't know anything about this job, I ought to be able to figure out what I'm going to be doing based on the questions that you're asking me in this interview. So make sure that they tie to one of those essential functions. And I would say that you improve the odds of a lengthy interview, a significant interview, if you ask a lot of questions like, tell me about a time when you did this. If one of the essential functions is to be able to work in a team to solve a problem, tell me about a time in school or in another job that you've had or within your family unit where you had to work as a team to accomplish a goal that would have been difficult to accomplish individually. And then let's sit back and let them tell you a story. If they take 3 or 4 minutes to tell a story, gosh, that's an eighth of your interview right there. If you're targeting 30 minutes, a 4-minute story, you only have to have 8 questions like that. But if you have a question like, what's your greatest strength? Well, my greatest strength is that I'm detail-oriented. Okay, that just used up 12 seconds of your interview. So you got to have a lot of those questions. So completeness. I'm struggling with that word, aren't I? I don't know why. I had a pretty good amount of sleep last night, and I've had 2 cups of coffee today. Also look at your knowledge, skills, abilities. If you say that it's important that you have the skill of communication or the ability to critical think or problem solve or think big picture or whatever, come up with a question that helps you to understand whether they actually can do what they claim. Remembering that a lot of resumes, we kind of pad it a little bit, we embellish just a little bit, we hope that you're not going to challenge us on this. If you can give me an example of a time when you've had to use this skill, or you can demonstrate to me that you have this knowledge, that's easy if it's a real technical job like accounts payable, because you've either got the knowledge of accounting or you don't. Skills and abilities aren't as easy to measure, but you may be able to come up with a question that gives me the opportunity to demonstrate that I can do this ability or that I do have this skill. If you're looking at your education and experience, if you require so many years of experience or prefer so many years of experience, you can say, tell me about the experience on your last job dealing with this kind of a situation. And keep it situation focused. Customer service, angry customers, taking leadership roles, or taking negative feedback if that's part of it. Give me an example of a time when you had somebody give you some constructive criticism and whether you got, how you handled that, how you responded to that, how you grew from that, whatever. All right, so completeness. Do you ask enough questions that are tied to those essential functions and those knowledge, skills, and abilities for me as an outside, an unbiased third-party observer to say, you've got a pretty good job here, you've done a pretty good job of asking the questions that are going to help you to say, can they do this job? That's good. Applicability. I'm really interested in this one. You're almost wasting your time and the candidate's time if you ask them a question that has nothing to do with the job whatsoever. And one of the things that I don't like so much about some of the job interview episodes is that they're not HR people. They are entrepreneurs, they are marketing people, they are operations people, they're CEOs. They don't have HR backgrounds and they don't know how to do an interview. They've learned a little bit about what works and doesn't work, but they don't know these kinds of things that you're learning in this class. And so in a lot of cases, they ask questions that you kind of go, ooh, be careful with that question. For example, if I say, tell me a little bit about yourself, you can say, well, I'm real heavy into Satan worship, and I sacrifice animals. I take pets from around the neighborhood and I offer them as sacrifice. I don't want to know that. If I don't hire you, it's because I told them I was a Satan worshiper, and that's discrimination or whatever. Don't open the door for them to go through and tell you things that you don't want to hear and you don't need to hear. If you want a question like, tell me about yourself, focusing on this job. If it's a child care assistant, tell me a little about yourself in terms of your interaction with kids. Even that could be a little dangerous because I like to watch them get dressed. I don't know, it's crazy. But somebody might tell you that thinking that it's okay, and then you're going, no. But don't ask questions that don't relate to the job. Everything that you ask ties to something. We've already talked about on this video, the essential functions or the KSAOs. And then lastly, the cleanliness. You're probably going to take this piece of paper and have it laying on the front of you, on the desk in front of you as you do your video interviews. So is it clean? Do the questions flow? Is there a logical thought process? Are you getting to a particular point? Are they phrased well? All that kind of stuff. Is it easy to keep up with where you are on the page? All that factors into a good interview. It's not just sitting down and winging questions off the top of your head, but having a purpose behind it. Okay, I don't know what else to tell you without wasting a lot of your time. Hopefully that gives you some ideas to think about. The short version of this is if you look at your job description and you really focus on those essential functions and those knowledge, skills, abilities, and other characteristics as you develop your questions. And if you have a lot of tell me a story kind of questions, then you're probably going to do pretty well. It's reasonable in some of these jobs to ask very short questions. Do you know the answer to this? Tell me the answer to that. Give me the definition of this. Because that's important for the job. You've got to know those kinds of things to be able to do this job. Just again, keep in mind that the more questions you have, like tell me the greatest this, or your strongest that, or give me the definition of this, you got to have lots of those questions to fill up 30 to 40 minutes. If you have questions after watching this video about questions, ask a question. Send me an email, send me a text, post to the Ask Dr. Grimes discussion board. Let's get this thing settled before you start working on this too much, because if you spend too much time going in the wrong direction, it's time you never get back, and you got to redo something that you could have done right the first time. Let me know if you have questions. Otherwise, I'm looking forward to seeing your questions, to giving you some feedback on those things, and hopefully helping you to have a really, really good game plan for your interviews that create a positive experience for both you and your potential employees. Hope you're having a good semester so far, and there will be one time later on this semester where you and I actually get together on a video conference interview to test your equipment before you do your interviews, and I'm looking forward to being able to meet with you individually for 10 or 15 minutes to get to know you a little bit and to get you prepared. Bye for now.